Jesus, thank you. Lord, thank you for beautiful fall days. Lord, thank you for time to come together as a community. Lord, so often I think that I and probably we take for granted Sunday mornings, that we get to come into this place and we get a time to pause, to enjoy each other, to enjoy your community that you've built. Lord, to be people that come to hear what you're saying. And so, Lord, I pray that this morning, as we come to the text, as we talk about the ways that we can so often drown out your voice, that you would give us ears to hear what you're calling us to, that you would give us eyes to see. And Lord, for me, that it wouldn't be my words, but that it would be your words, and that above all else, you would get glory in this place. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for the ways that you love us, for the ways that you care for us. We love you, we praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. In 1999, there was a cultural phenomenon that rose up around the movie The Sixth Sense. Now, some of you in here are laughing a little bit at The Sixth Sense. If you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, but you've had 25 years. So it tells the story of Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist, treating a young boy by the name of Cole, who claims to see dead people. I see dead people. Where do you see dead people? Everywhere. And as the story goes on, we find out that Cole actually has the ability to see ghosts, that he has this ability to see the supernatural, and as he interacts with them, he tries to free them so they can go to the afterlife. And he engages with this really dynamic child psychologist, played by Bruce Willis, who walks along the path with him. Malcolm comes to this realization that Cole's abilities are real, understanding what he's seeing. But at the end of the movie, we find out the big twist, that Malcolm has been a ghost all along as well. That the opening scene of the movie where we thought he survived being killed, he'd been killed. What's interesting, though, is once you know the details of the movie, once you know that the big spoiler at the end of the movie, you start seeing all of these details throughout the movie that you didn't realize. For instance, Bruce Willis's outfit never changes throughout the movie. He wears the same thing the whole time, the thing that he was wearing when he was killed. The other thing you start seeing is that when people are interacting around Bruce Willis all throughout the movie, that they never interact with him. He's in the vicinity, but no one ever acknowledges his presence besides Cole. My favorite one is that the directors talked about how the color red is not used much throughout the movie, except for when ghosts corrupt things or touch something. And every time Bruce Willis touches something, you see that color red appear. See, if you'd been paying attention throughout the movie, you'd know what was coming. You'd know all the signs that point to the fact that Bruce Willis is dead. And this week, I found myself thinking about this movie and the details that we miss as we struggle to put a story together. That sometimes the ways that we're viewing a story or our own things that we bring to it or our own perspectives make it so we can't clearly see the story that's right in front of us. How we let our assumptions and biases cloud our view. And at times, we certainly do this with the voice of God. We let other parts of our worldview, other parts of our reality drown out what God is speaking to in the world. So often, we can miss out on the hints and the stories and the voices of God along the journey of life. We let the voices of the world drown out the voice of Jesus. But specifically, the question then is, how do we miss out on Jesus? How do we not heed his voice? Well, today, as we come to our text in John 7, we get 5 examples of how we can drown out the voice of God and the countercultural call of Jesus to embrace a different way. So if you have your Bibles, open up to John chapter 7. And while we're turning there, let me catch you up a little bit about where we've been so far. This fall, we're studying the Gospel of John, where John seeks to answer the question of who Jesus really is and why he's worth following after. John hits this over and over and over again throughout the Gospel. To know Jesus is to know the Father, and to know the Father is to know ourselves. Jesus will take the darkest parts of people's lives and transform them if they're willing to bring them into the light. And the first half of John is all about these different signs and stories that about the work of Jesus. That in Christ we see our worlds transformed by all who come to him. That in Jesus all different types of people are invited to come to him. That the gospel is for those that don't look like you or think like you or act like you, spend like you, or vote like you. John uses these 7 intentional signs and miracles in the first half of John to paint this picture of who Jesus is so that we may believe in the good news of the gospel. That we would recognize him as Messiah, that we would be transformed by his rescuing work. That the message of the Messiah would capture our head, our heart, and our hands. And that we would give our allegiance to Christ. Last week, we also saw, though, that these signs are meant to challenge our assumptions about who Jesus is or who we think the Messiah should be like. That Jesus is the bread of life, giving life to all who follow after him. But Jesus isn't a God that fits in our boxes. So often our assumptions try to put Jesus in a box, but rather the call of Jesus is a topsy-turvy kingdom. One where we're not meant to put Jesus in our box, but rather we're meant to fit in his way in the world. And in Jesus, he calls over and over again, especially in the last few chapters, to decide if we want to follow after who he actually is. Oh, at this point in John, Jesus is calling people to make a decision. Will you follow after me? Will you take me as I am? Do you believe that I have keys to the kingdom of God? See, Jesus wants us to see that he's the promised Messiah, maybe not always the Messiah that we want him to be. However, what's missing in the story so far is we see Jesus over and over and over again calling people to respond. But we've only seen a little bit about how people actually respond to Jesus. We've gotten some big picture ideas of how the crowd works and responds to him. But in our story today in John chapter 7, we get this rapid fire collection of people's unbelief in responding to Jesus and the ways that they've let different voices or different ways in the world drown out God. And the first one is this: successism. This is what it says in John 7, verses 1 through 9. After this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. But when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. And since you're doing these things, show yourself to the world." For even his own brothers did not believe him. Therefore, Jesus told them, "My time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it does hate me because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I am not going up to this festival because my time has not yet fully come." And after he said this, he stayed in Galilee. Sometime after his teaching on the bread of life, probably about 6 months, because Passover to this new festival was about 6 months, Jesus ends up back in his hometown. And he's back home avoiding the Jewish leaders that desire to kill him, Hold on to that fact. It'll become important later. But as he goes back home, he certainly hasn't avoided all confrontations, because he walks into a place where you probably have the most honest conversations, the table with his little brothers that are going to tell him exactly what they think about what he's doing. See, they're all making plans to go to the Festival of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And this was one of the 3 main feasts in the year that was meant to mark out the Exodus journey for the people of God, and also the harvest season for the people of God. And the Festival of Booths was the biggest party that happened. What happened is everyone journeyed to Jerusalem, and they built these makeshift structures. It was during the autumn equinox, when the light was starting to dim during the day, when the harvest was being reaped. They would set up these booths in the fields, these tents, these makeshift structures, or sometimes on top of their homes, and they would stay in these for a week, and they would just party. It was this huge, massive celebration about God leading his people into the promised land, about how they sojourned in the desert for 40 years, but God delivered them to a place that was overflowing with abundance. And while it took place during the autumn equinox, it was to remember that the light would dim. But little did they know that the light was dawning in Jesus. But it's also interesting, too, because this would have been the festival when the most people showed up. Passover is probably the most important festival theologically for the Jewish people, but the Festival of Booths was the most popular. It's probably similar to us that Christmas is the most popular Christian holiday, but Easter is probably the most important Christian holiday. But we don't give gifts around a tree on Easter. Knowing that the crowd and party will be in Jerusalem at this time, Jesus' brothers tell him to get with the program. You've been doing this stuff. Now's your time to shine. Go to Jerusalem. All the Jewish people will be there. Everyone who's anyone. Go do your tricks and gain popularity. Here's your chance to explode in fame and prestige. And in their mind, all Jesus really needs to make it is an agent. And they're the ones for the job. But it also says that his brothers don't believe in him. Because the fact is, they're probably so concerned with his success that they miss out on who he actually is. And Jesus doesn't hesitate to tell them what his mission is. He says, "The world hates me because I testify against it and its evil ways." See, Jesus is calling out over and over again the ways that his good news is antithetical to the good news of the world. Because Jesus isn't worried about the timeline of the world, but the timeline of the Father. He declines their offer, waiting for a quieter moment to go to the festival. Because Jesus is not concerned with success by worldly standards, but rather with successful embrace of the character of God. We live in a world of rank spectacle. Popularity and success drive our Western reality more than anything else. If you don't believe me, think about how we pick our recipes or our restaurants nowadays. I like to bake at home. That is one of my stress reliefs. It's how you end up looking like this. And I don't get out of bed for a recipe 4.8 or above or below. You got to get a good recipe online when I Google it, and it's got to have a lot of people that have reviewed it for me to want to bake it. Because that's how we live our life, right? We look to see who's been the most successful, who's won the battles. When we choose a restaurant, we want to see who has the most reviews and the high reviews. When we look for people's voices on social media, who has the most followers and why. We look for power and prestige and popularity. We do this, including the church. We have a Google rating, in case you're wondering. Every church does. But showing off so the gospel can be successful, rather than letting the character and nature of Jesus drive us, is just another way to not listen to the voice of God. Because while it's well-meaning, if our goal is success, even success for the sake of the gospel, we're going to embrace unbelief. Because in that moment, we're embracing the way and wisdom of the very world that Jesus came to confront. And in doing so, we drown out the voice of the humble God by pursuing the gods of earthly influence. We can miss out on the power and presence of Jesus when we do this, becoming sarcastic brothers sitting around at a table, calling out the ways that Jesus hasn't quite made it yet. Or as Simon Ponsonby wrote, to truly encounter Jesus is to be knocked sideways, astonished, or overwhelmed. Mild interest means you have not met him. To follow Jesus, to hear his voice, we must be willing to lay down our success at his feet. We desire to see Jesus succeed in our lives and in our world, but we want him to do it in his way. The lowly and humble way of Jesus will always be at tension with the way of success and power. And it doesn't mean that success and power are necessarily bad things. If God gives those things as we're following him, good. It's for his glory. But we also means that we have to critically observe our torqued motives at times if we want to hear the voice of God. Successism can drive out the voice of God, but it's really only the tip of the iceberg. Many of us can see how hubris leads us away from hearing who God is and what he's doing in the world. But the more complicated one is when we start to see how groupism drives us. This is what it says starting in verse 10. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Now at the festival, the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus and asking, "Where is he?" Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering about him. Some said, "He is a good man," and others replied, "No, he deceives the people." But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders. Eventually, Jesus goes to Jerusalem for the Festival of Booths. And as he goes, he initially arrives in secret and hears all that the people have to say about him. He doesn't start teaching until halfway through the festival. And some say that he's a good man, and others highlight that he might be a fraud. And the leaders are all looking around for him, ready to at least arrest him and maybe put him to death. Yet none of them do anything or say anything publicly because they're afraid of the crowd. They've embraced groupism or groupthink, so caught up in their own idea of how it should go as a community that they're afraid to make a decision. Or maybe better put, they're so caught up in their community and societal views that they have succumbed to the theological peer pressure, not deciding for Jesus for fear of the repercussions. And when we embrace groupism, we too can let the voices of our community around us drown out the voices of wisdom and the voice of God. I don't know if this is still a thing, but when I was in high school, we used to have to watch the videos that were all about don't embrace peer pressure. And my favorite saying, I had a friend that used to say, it's not peer pressure if you say yes, which isn't true to the high schoolers. But what's funny is when you start thinking as a group, you do really stupid things. When I was in college, we had a rule. I went to college in Colorado, and we had a rule that you weren't allowed to go in the pond on campus. You weren't allowed in the pond. We had a stretch of weather that was in the negative degrees, and it froze over the lake, and there was a group of friends that we all came from New Mexico together, and when we looked out at the lake, we thought to ourselves, it says we're not allowed to go in the pond, but it says nothing about us going on the pond. So we made a ramp and we tested the ice. This made no sense. My friend, who's about half as tall as me, went out on the ice first and he said, if I fall through, Christian can come get me, which is a bad idea. But then we built a ramp and we went sledding on the ice. We realized when the RA was clearing his throat behind us that it was more the spirit of the law than the letter of the law that we were breaking. You've probably been in situations where groups have come up with some idea only later on to realize that you'd missed the point, or that maybe you hadn't said something because in the moment. See, the problem is that groupism can only get us so far, and to follow Jesus requires courage. It requires us being willing to trust in who Jesus is with all of who you are, your head, your heart, and your hands. It means challenging what the world views as normal, and you will go against the grain of culture at times if you follow Jesus. And we see this in Western culture all the time. We believe that we're masters of our own fate, people that can conquer the world. Wealth and individuality are key parts of the American dream. But the way of Jesus is built on generosity and community, both very opposed to the ways of the West. And if we're not committed to following the way of Jesus, we can often fall into the trap of groupism or cultural think, where we allow cultural norms to drown out the voice of God. And so to follow Jesus means taking risks of being willing to step out of groupism to follow him, or to be a new community shaped by the values of Jesus, being willing to be challenged by each other. Or as theologian Frederick Dale Bruner puts it, the way to know Jesus' truthfulness is to make the very practical decision to believe and to seek, to put into practice Jesus' clear claims and commands. The way to his truth, in other words, is practical, not theoretical, simple and not complex, straightforward and not convoluted, will to do his will, and one will see. The group will always vie for our attention, but we're invited to listen to the voice of God instead of letting it be drowned out by the din and insecurity of the crowd. But groupism also has a sinister cousin. It's not just that we listen to the group, but if we're not careful, we can also drown out the voice of God by creating hierarchies and ivory towers, by ranking who has a voice in the group. And when we do so, we embrace elitism over the voice of God. This is what verse 14 says. Not until halfway through the festival did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. The Jews were amazed and asked, "How did this man get such learning without having been taught?" And Jesus answered, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me." Halfway through the festival, Jesus begins to preach and to teach. And as he has in other settings, the people around him hear his voice, they hear what he has to say, and they're amazed by his teaching. But what's interesting is this time around, they're not amazed by what he has to say, but rather they're amazed because they wonder how he got the credentials to say what he has to say. They're worried about his education. He doesn't have some rabbinic pedigree. He doesn't have the theological background to preach and teach the way that other Jewish leaders do. See, the people aren't listening to the words of Jesus and what they sound like because they care about pedigree before content. They're overlooking the power of God. And in doing so, they're overlooking one of the prophecies about Jesus in Deuteronomy 18, where it says this, "The Lord said to me, what they say is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks the other name of other gods, is to be put to death." It's a commandment, but it's also pointing out the picture that God will fill his prophet with his words. See, they've forgotten that the one who put the very words in the mouth of Moses now stands there speaking to them about who God is. See, we do this too all the time. We let elitism cloud how we view our culture and our relationship with others, and certainly our relationship with God. This week, I found a study about Apple versus Android users. 25% of Apple users who are on the dating circuit say that dating someone who has an Android phone is a deal breaker. And 30% of Android users, rightfully so, feel pressured to switch to an Apple phone. we're not careful, we can embrace elitism, thinking that our way is the only way. We can do the same thing theologically, missing out on what Jesus is saying because we let our pedigree interpret the Bible rather than let the words of God speak. Or as seminary professor Dr. Clarice Martin puts it, perhaps instead of reading the Bible to assure ourselves that we are right, we should read it to discover where we have not been listening. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying education is bad, but I'm saying that theological arrogance can cloud the voice of God if you're not careful. And I speak from personal experience with this. As someone who has and struggles with theological arrogance at times, who thinking that I have the right answers, it is a dangerous idol blocking what it means to hear what God has to say to you. Because we stand on what we know rather than listen to what God is calling us to. Elitism can lead to theological pedigree and correctness, drowning out the voice of God. But so can the opposite, compromise. Compromising belief in God for the message of the world. Because elitism is dangerous, but secularism is just as dangerous. This is what it says in verses 16 through 20. Jesus answered, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. And anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. Whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory. But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me?" "You are demon-possessed," the crowd answered. "Who is trying to kill you?" After speaking to his teaching coming from the Father, Jesus gives this brief teaching on what it means to follow after him. Remember, to follow Jesus is to follow the Father, and he points that following him, seeing him for who he really is to glorify the Father. It's to honor the Father with your words and actions, to trust the one he sent because he reflects the character of God. Or as Bruner puts it, Jesus did not come to give the world another interesting opinion for consideration. He came claiming ultimacy. But then at the end, Jesus has this seemingly weird aside that I'd never noticed before, where he says, you ignore the law, you do all these things, and then it almost feels like a non sequitur at first, where he's like, why are you trying to kill me? But I hadn't thought about it until this week, what's going on here. Because of course murder is bad. Like no one should be murdered. This is not a controversial opinion. It's concerning that the authorities want to kill Jesus. And it's clear from the whole chapter, and actually from the book of John so far, that they're ready to kill him to save their own skin or to get rid of this person that they don't like listening to. They'd rather be conspirators in his murder than watch him grow in prominence. But what I hadn't thought about until this week is that they suspended the law to do this. The very law that they're holding Jesus to, that they keep coming back to say, you have to follow this, you have to do it this way. They've been so angry at him about Sabbath, this incident that happened back in chapter 5, where he didn't actually break Sabbath, but in their view, he kind of tiptoed around some cultural norms. They're willing to break one of the 10 commandments, do not murder. Those who are upset with Jesus for maybe breaking the ways that they interpret the law are willing to break the explicit nature of God's law to kill his son. They've compromised what they believe so they can embrace their cultural values and principles. And they've done what we also do far too often by embracing secularism. Now, that word gets thrown around a lot in the church. It's kind of this like meaningless boogeyman sometimes that we just use to describe things that we don't love about the world. But really what it means is simply this: embracing the ways and power of the world over the power of the gospel. It's compromising what the gospel calls you to, loving your neighbor, walking justly, listening to God's call, even when it's hard or countercultural. But when we don't do these things, when we compromise and embrace something else, we're not only drowning out the voice of God, but we're also willfully turning towards the thing that he came to confront in the world. And I want to say this, because the other thing that happens with secularism is it gets thrown out a lot during elections by different sides. This is a bipartisan issue. We all struggle with compromising our faith for the sake of popularity, power, and prestige. Yes, even libertarians. But we're also called to put aside the world for the way of Jesus. A too world-friendly ministry can be cowardly, because Jesus isn't calling us to embrace the manner and method of the world, but rather the manner and the method of the kingdom of God. Or as Pastor Brian Zahn once said, Christianity is inherently countercultural. That's how it thrives. When it tries to become a dominant culture, it becomes corrupted. And that's been the case from the very beginning. So the question is, what does it mean to be countercultural in our world? What does it mean, or what are the ways that I listen to culture rather than the way of Jesus? The problem is we all struggle with this one. This is one where we've all let probably pieces of our world bleed into our faith. I'm guessing we're not all this drastic, but I thought this week about Nazi Germany in the church. How the church compromised its values and beliefs to embrace something that they saw as power and prestige, thinking that this way would lead them to success, but what it led to was horrible tragedy. Martin Niemöller, a famous pastor who actually originally supported the Nazi regime, but later on switched his sides and was spent many years in a concentration camp after, actually about 7 years in a concentration camp because of his beliefs, famously said this: "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." He said this in reflecting on the ways that he had compromised what it meant to follow Jesus for the sake of power and prestige, embracing the power ways of the world instead of the humble ways of Jesus. While we can certainly sit in our ivory towers, we also face a temptation to compromise the good news of the gospel or to follow Jesus for the things of this world. Because when we allow our view and focus to be shaped by the world, it certainly changes how we view others. This is what it says right at the end of the passage. Finally, the temple guards went back to the chief priests and the Pharisees, who asked them, "Why didn't you bring him in? No one ever spoke the way this man does." The guards reply, "You mean he has deceived you also?" The Pharisees retorted, "Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed in him?" "No, but this mob that knows nothing of the law, there is a curse on them." And Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus earlier and who was one of their own number, asked, "Does our law condemn a man without first hearing him to find out what he's been doing?" And they replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Look into it. You will find that a prophet does not come out of Galilee." The chapter ends with this really interesting dismissive take by the Jewish leaders towards Jesus. The guards that were sent out to capture Jesus earlier in the chapter come back empty-handed by saying, "The words he says sound pretty good. We were interested and were astounded by his teaching." And the leaders are indignant. They say the mob knows nothing about the law and can't be trusted. And here is interesting. We see Nicodemus pop up again. And we see his progression of faith that he says, hey, what he's saying sounds like something we shouldn't be condemning. Do you think he could be the Messiah? And then this is where we get the real reason that the Pharisees don't like Jesus. A prophet doesn't come from Galilee, which is an interesting statement because prophets have come from Galilee. Both Jonah and Nahum were from Galilee, writers that have been included in the Old Testament canon. They would have read their works. They would have memorized what they had to say. But what they really mean is that Jesus doesn't fit in our picture of what a leader should look like. It's a classist view of Jesus, one that excludes him because of his education, his origin, and his status as a poor carpenter in society. And if we're not careful, we talked about this last week too, we'll let ourselves be shaped far more by our own biases instead of by the way of Jesus. One of my favorite things to ask people in small talk is, what do you do? Usually people ask, what do you do for a living? Or what do you like to do? Because how people answer that question is interesting, because you learn a lot about what that person likes or what they identify as. And I'm not saying it's like a perfect way, but it's fun and interesting to hear how people identify themselves. And why I say that is because those aren't bad things. Again, there are parts of our identity that are all good things. We should hold tight to those beautiful things that God has put in us, those creative callings that God has given us. But if we find our ultimate identity in anything besides God, we'll start to listen to that voice more than his. And when we do so, we begin to miss out on the beautiful cavalcade of God's voice and grace through the variety of voices that make up the kingdom of God. It's been interesting over the last year, people from back where we came from in Albuquerque will ask, what's been your favorite part of the church in Virginia? And I would say there's a lot of things I love about the church. This church has been nothing but a gift to me and to my family. But at the same time, one of the things I love about our church is how diverse our church is. I think last I counted, there's 11 different countries in our church. And there's people from all around the world, and that's indicative of this area. But one of the beautiful things is it gives us a full-orbed picture of the gospel. It gives us a picture of how people see the gospel play out in different, beautiful in different ways. But when we embrace a classist mentality, if we're not careful, we'll miss out on the diverse voices in our community and what they have to say to us. There's 5 ways to drown out the voice of God: successism, groupism, elitism, secularism, and classism. And each is a danger that leads us away from Jesus. Each leads us to embrace some sort of version of Jesus, whether demon or saint, but they also lead us to miss out on who he actually is. And that's why we need a different way, the way of listening to Jesus. Here's the good news. Peter Grieg, in his lovely book, How to Listen to God, writes this: before we can love God with all our hearts and souls and strength, we must learn to listen. This then is the prerequisite that unlocks the purpose of life itself. Sometimes we miss God's voice because it doesn't look quite like what we want it to or desire it to. Because the voice of God is humble, it's courageous, it's empathetic, it's virtuous, it's gracious. It's the antithesis to the voice of the world. When they attempted to force him into power, Jesus chose the way of sacrifice. When they tried to bully him into changing his views, he was courageous. He had empathy for the broken, the sick, and the lost in the world. He was a man of integrity, and whoever comes to him receives his grace. See, Jesus was these things so that we could find life. Jesus isn't trying to beat us over the head, trying to say you're messing up in all these ways, but rather Jesus is trying to cut through the noise so that you can hear who he is, because Jesus loves you. And the invitation is to listen, to open your eyes and ears to follow after what he's calling to you, not to listen to the ways of the world, even though they're enticing. Because if we do, we may end up at the end of the story realizing that we missed all the signs along the way. But instead, it starts with understanding what he's calling you to. Maybe this week, practically, take some time to figure out the voices you listen to and what informs your worldview. What are the voices and isms that you embrace over the way of Jesus? If you're a journaler, that's something that might be worth thinking about this week. Because Jesus says you've been saved by grace through faith, not by works, lest anyone should boast. The invitation is to come, to be with him, to hear the good news of Jesus. Jesus, who desires that you know him intimately and is issuing all these warnings, not because he wants you to measure up to something, but because he desires to be in relationship with you. He wants you to hear him and to be transformed. And listening to God, following the way of Jesus, can change the world. George Washington Carver, the Peanut King, said that God spoke to him every day as he walked, and then he would go back to what he called God's workshop and do what he saw God calling him to, using his gifts for the life of the world. John Milton, famously blind poet, would dictate to his daughter whatever he heard God speak to him the night before in the morning. Sojourner Truth, the great civil rights and suffrage leader, chose her name after being freed from slavery and having a dream about Jesus calling her. And when she chose her name, that was the name that she felt like Jesus had called her to. Or I think a lot about my friend Steve Harrington back in Albuquerque, one who loves Jesus just in the simply everyday parts of his life, an accountant for Jesus, but one that when you meet him is encouraging to others because he's just created space in his life to hear the voice of God. See, the heart of faith is listening to Jesus, and that begins by first realizing the ways that we can drown him out. Brothers and sisters, may you be wary of the voice of the world as it tries to drown out the Father. And as you listen, may the things of the world grow strangely dim, and may his voice speak louder than all the others. Amen. Let's pray. Lord, I confess that this week as I thought about this and read this and, Lord, looked at these, I confess that I so often can fall into all 5 categories. Embracing so many of the narratives of the world over the good news of the gospel. And Lord, I would venture a guess that I'm not alone in this room in struggling with that. And so, Lord, in those places that we struggle to hear you, Lord, we ask that you would cut through the noise of the world. Lord, we ask that you would give us courage to follow you, that we would be a community marked by your way in the world. Lord, I don't know where people are here this morning, but I pray that if they haven't heard your voice, that, Lord, you would cut through the noise. They would come to know you. Lord, you are the God that transforms us from the inside out, the God who desires that we would know your overwhelming love and mercy for us. And Lord, I pray that this morning, for those of us who need that word, you would cut through that. Jesus, thank you. Thank you that even when we struggle to listen, you do not struggle or give up on us, that you love us, that you continue to pursue us. And so, Lord, we ask humbly that even this morning we would be aware of what you're saying to us. We love you, we praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, for the wonders of his love. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, for the wonders of his love, his amazing love. For God so loved the world that he gave us his one and only Son to save. For God so loved the world that he gave us his one and only Son to save us. Whoever believes in him will live forever. The power of hell forever defeated. Now it is well. I'm walking in freedom. For God so loved the world. Bring all your failures, bring your addictions. Come lay them down at the foot of the cross. Jesus
Jesus is waiting. God so loved